I thought this photo of a potted plant has a lot of interesting challenges to try and draw it with a black fine liner pen. And therefore, I thought it would make an interesting practice exercise. Now, because it's a practice exercise, I'm not overly concerned with do I get it finished? And I wasn't quite sure how much I would draw because I didn't anticipate I could get a finished drawing done in 10 or 15 minutes. As it turned out, I actually spent 22 minutes on it, and that's simply partly because I had such a fun time drawing it, and I just wanted to keep pushing and developing what I'd drawn a little bit more. I wanted to try and learn more about my drawing process of this subject by continuing what I'd started. But if I had stopped after 10, 11 minutes, where really I had most of this foliage done in outline, it would have already been a very profitable exercise because it would have already been a great exercise in trying to capture the feel of this plant, trying to capture the irregular edges, the ruffled edges, trying to capture the way these sword-shaped leaves come out from a central point, trying to capture the way their shapes curl over. They're almost like hands of fingers splayed out that are layered above and below each other. But some of them are a bit knocked about and a bit battered, and some of them hang lower than others. So it was trying to capture all of these things in my drawing that I'm thinking of. But you can see I'm trying to draw this fairly precisely. Now, I will at some point switch to drawing more the feel of the foliage, but all the prominent parts I want to draw carefully for two reasons. One is I really want to make sure I capture those elements of the feel of how the plant looks that I just spoke about. But also, I want to position these main points of the if you like, the centers of each of these hands of leaves in the proper relationship to each other, to space them properly, both horizontally and vertical, so that we get this overall shape adequately drawn. So that's what I'm trying to do. That's my focus at this point. And I'm thinking I'll just do as much as I can, and then maybe I'll just stop. And this then does remind me to mention that be flexible in these daily drawing exercises. And even though you might be doing them as drawing exercises and seeking to do them in 10 or 15 or whatever for you is a reasonably short period of time, a fairly intense period of drawing, that there's nothing wrong with using them differently or doing them over 2 sessions, particularly if you can separate the sort of thing you're doing. So in this instance, for instance, you might do what I'm doing now, I thought of it as spiderly outline because the hands of leaves looked quite spidery, I thought. And then come back in another session to put some hatching lines on, or to do something to somehow enhance the three-dimensionality of the line work. So be flexible, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And if you've got a day of more time and the drawing is inspiring you to want to give a little more time or to go further, then do that. Don't feel obliged to stick to the thought or the intention, the planning of how the drawing was going to go before you started. So as I mentioned before, I'm working quite carefully from the reference, and I'm particularly looking at how these finger-like leaves, sword-shaped leaves, bend and fold and fall down, and the way the tips can sometimes go upwards or downwards as well. I'm looking at the effect of the way they twist slightly on the way we see them. Some parts of the one leaf we see more flat on, other ones we see more side on, depending on the twist. Also, that some of the leaves are irregular because there are little bits taken out of them, and it's easy just to ignore this and to draw them all as if they're somehow perfect. But in the end, we lose something of the sense of reality that we get when the imperfections are drawn in. And it's ironic that to add the imperfections actually takes more work than to, if you like, draw them perfectly. But I think this is part of seeing the seeing the essence of the plant, seeing the essence of the overall effect so that we can capture it in our drawing. So we're still seeing this real time. We're still within the 10 minutes, still well within the 10 minutes. Notice the other thing I've done is I've not attempted to really start to draw the pot yet. I've put a bit of an estimation as to where I think that lip is going to be. I'm pretty sure I actually change it slightly on the right-hand side. I end up having a little more trouble with the right-hand side of the pot up the top. And then I had some troubles with the left-hand side of the pot as well. But we'll talk about those when we get to those in a few minutes. In a moment, we will speed things up a lot. After the 10 minutes of real time, we'll go into sped up time, which for this is 4 times actual speed. But if you want to see that slower, remember you can use the cog icon to reduce it to half video speed, which will bring it back to double drawing speed, which I think is still a quite reasonable speed at which to be able to take in a fair amount of detail. And if you're finding this interesting, helpful, please, why not hit the like button right now for me? That will really help me and my channel out as much as I hope these videos are helping you. The other thing to observe carefully in the reference is the way the edging of each side of these leaves ripples. They're not straight and smooth and flat as, say, a long eucalyptus leaf would be mostly. But there's very much a rippling effect that goes along each side. So I need to, at least in some of the more prominent leaves, capture that. That's the sort of detail that we can get away with not putting everywhere if in all the leaves that jump out at us visually do have it. So that's another thing to bear in mind. Work out what are the star event leaves, parts of leaves. What are the leaves that we see first as our eyes first engage with this? They're the ones to draw more carefully, more slowly, to capture more of the characteristics of the way the plant is formed and the way the leaves hang. And then we can add more background foliage that's in effect the same, but we don't need to go to the same precision. In fact, visually it usually works better if we don't, because that creates some separation between what's usually the closer leaves that we've done more carefully, more slowly, more detailed, and the further back ones. So that gives us a sense of depth a little more, which always helps add to a sense of realism if there's a sense of depth. The other thing with this sort of tangle to bear in mind is to make sure that all of our leaves are credible. And by that I mean, if a leaf goes under another leaf, that it comes out the other side looking like it's the same leaf, that we don't have leaves that just disappear or don't line up properly, because that will also start to create a sense of unreality. So we're almost at the 10 minutes now, but I think you can certainly see here the way I'm doing it and the way I've tried to capture the effect of the shapes of the sides and the bends of the leaves. I haven't been super fussy with that. I have been super fussy with the general positioning of these hands and whether we're looking at them more side on or more straight down. But after that, I'm trying to capture the finer details more characteristically than exactly. And that becomes even more so, as I just said, when I start to do the ones that are behind. Because I'm thinking now, I think I'll spend longer on this and finish the drawing, at least to some degree, because I'm having a good time with it. And so we always have to locate the leaves that we're drawing, where they start, where they finish, when they go under something else. And avoid the temptation to draw a leaf over the top of another leaf simply because you didn't quite realize what was happening when you drew that first leaf, but it does go over the top. If that's the case, leave out the second leaf or let it go under if that's visually possible, because we don't want to create impossible situations with our line work. And when we do one leaf over the top of another, and we can in effect see through the leaf, unless we can hide that point where the leaves are crossing by somehow hatching the lower leaf, then it really doesn't work well for creating a sense of realism. So, although I felt like it was going to take forever to do these, when I started, in just 10 minutes, it really has been possible to draw most of the expanse of this. And so in the sped up time, I'm really just drawing those background leaves that I referred to, and then I decide to add some hatching as well. And the important thing with going right the way across the way I am, and now we've just gone into sped up time, is that it lets me then position the pot more accurately, because the pot has a certain balance in terms of its position with the foliage on top. And I need to try and get that looking the same way if it's going to sit comfortably. I also need to try and center my pot on what looks like the obvious place that all of these fern fronds are centering in within the pot. And the best way to do that is to try and do it accurately. So I have now positioned the base of the pot, and you notice I worked out where the base was going to go first. And I did a bit of a line there, and that let me then not make the mistake of drawing the sides, but drawing them too long. It also helped me a little bit, but not enough, helped me a little bit to get a sense of how wide the pot needed to be to keep the proportions the same as in my drawing. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. It could be a slightly narrower or a slightly wider pot. But what we do want is still a symmetrical pot, particularly in relation to the curvature of this angle of the base of the pot. And what I did was I began to do the pot too far to the left. And you can see I have a number of lines there, trying to play with it, work out, no, that's just a bit too fat, still a bit too fat, still a bit too fat. So that was visually a little bit of a challenge. What I do at the end is I try to, if you like, emphasize the correct line with the hatching that I do. And there's not much I can do with the incorrect lines except leave them there. And while I don't think there's any chance that we'd mistake them as being ferns, there's such a tangle of lines there, even more so when I add the hatching that I'm doing now, that I don't think it's super obvious. And this is why I say, don't get upset when you make a mistake. See it as something that becomes part of the drawing, and we do our best to minimize any visually awkwardness that's created by it. But otherwise, we leave it there as part of our journey. And unless it's a commission or something, and so there really is a higher standard for what we produce, we just use it as a learning tool and move on in our next drawing. And so now I've very quickly done this hatching that I talked about before, and then it's done. What do you think? You'll find the reference, of course, on my channel community page. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers, having a lot of fun with this series. I hope you are too. If you've missed them, then there's a playlist where they're all readily accessible. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I did. I'll see you next time. Bye.